All right, we'll call it to order, and we do have a quorum, you said?
Yes, we do.
Okay. I guess the first thing then is to approve the minutes. Now that we've worked through all the logistics and everybody has them, do we have a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from the last meeting.
All right, thank you, Tim.
I'm sorry, there are actually 3 different sets. If you don't mind approving all of them, it's a January 16th, June 2nd, and June 10th.
Do you mind doing that for all of them, Tim?
No, I will make the motion to approve the minutes for what Lori
As
said,
stated.
the 3 meetings.
I'll second the motion.
Thanks, Kim. And now, Lori, I got to do a roll call. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
All right, Cindy, what say you?
Approve.
All right, Randy.
Approved.
Mr. Urban?
Yes.
Kim, I guess you
Approved.
did it, so you're approved. And Tim, you've made the motion, and I am a yay.
Okay, yeah.
Thank you, folks.
So we have 4 approves and 1 yay.
All right, so then the next one is the CARES Act funding and the program implementation. I understand, Becky, you had some input from the, and Marcy, welcome. Becky, you had some more information you want to share from, or what we can't do with it?
Let's just call it an update and,
Okay.
and see where that kind of leaves us. So, okay. So just to kind of follow up, the last time that we met, of course, we received word that we received the $300,000 approved through the county in CARES Act funding, but we were trying to get some clarification on whether or not the projects that we talked about would be eligible. So the bottom line is, at the federal level, they continue to make tweaks to the regulations that guide the allowed uses of this funding. And so the county has been kind of beating their head against the wall, trying to get clarification from the federal level, interpretation of the regulations that are not always very specific. They have engaged with a lobbyist that they're working with directly, who's in specific contact with the folks in DC to both interpret general questions as well as bring up specific uses. And the whole goal is to try to get green lights to projects so that when they get audited and they know that they're going to be audited, that nothing will fail an audit, and then they would be responsible for paying the funds back. If we were to accidentally misuse the funds, then the county would come back to Matthews and we would have to repay the county, who would have to repay the feds. So pretty important for us to get it right, but it's hard to get it right when nobody kind of knows what way's up. And so I had a good conversation with the county that what they are going to be implementing in mid-August is what they are calling a statement of purpose process. And so that will be a formal submittal of any planned uses of the funding, where we would give detail of what we plan to use it for, how that relates to COVID, the amount of money, if we're working with other organizations. And the county will do an internal approval that may involve also kicking it through their lobbyist for specific application questions. And then they would come back and give us a formal green light to say, yes, based on what you're describing, that would qualify, or no, it would not, make some tweaks and try again. So they are still formalizing that process. They don't have anything live yet. They're still trying to figure out, is it a form? Is it a portal? So they're still working that out on their end. But bottom line, short of going through that formal approval, they can kind of guide us and say, be wary of this, or be suspicious of that, but they're unwilling to give us a, yes, that sounds good, or no, terrible idea, start over. So informally, I did go through the projects that this group had discussed and looked for some feedback from them on each of them. And all of them had some kind of a hiccup or another, again, from a preliminary perspective. So let me just try to find my notes here. So with the nonprofit support that we discussed, so what had come up, if you'll recall, was a lot of our nonprofits in town are losing out on funding, particularly those that would have received funding from Matthews Alive. So could we not provide some financial support to those nonprofits during this time to help make up for what they're not receiving from Matthews Alive? And the big no-no with that is that CARES Act funding says that you cannot replace lost revenue. And so they felt like that would be a very clear replacing of lost revenue if we used Matthews Alive as the criteria. Now, she said there are other ways that you can potentially put together something that could still support nonprofits. As an example, are you providing revenue, or are you providing a micro grant to help them make payroll? So now we could all kind of expand on that and say, well, aren't they struggling to make payroll because they've lost revenue? But if you don't make the Matthews Alive part of the conversation and you're just saying, here's $2,000 to help make payroll during one of the eligible months, that stood a stronger likelihood of being eligible. What would make it even stronger would be if one of those nonprofits was doing something directly related to coronavirus relief. So they were putting on an event to help artists that have been hurt by COVID, or they are handing out food to people who have lost their jobs from COVID. And so you're helping fund those food purchases, or maybe the staff time that it takes to put together that event. So the stronger of a direct tie that you can make to, say, their work with COVID, then that would make it even stronger. But again, unless we submit something, we're not going to have a formal answer. But we at least know going in and saying we want to give people funds because they lost out on Matthews Alive dollars, that's going to be a no-go. So we would have to come up with something more creative with the nonprofits. On the marketing side, in a nutshell, it's completely untested. And so they said that marketing dollars right now, they feel good, are eligible if you're doing a public health campaign, stay 6 feet apart, wash your hands, wear a mask, that kind of marketing. They are unclear if marketing to help promote, say, buying local, supporting your local businesses, if that would qualify. She said, we know that gift cards would be a no-go. So we did talk about kind of a gift card program here. Gift cards would not be eligible, but that marketing campaign, she said, it feels like it could be viewed as sort of one step removed from actually helping the folks who need it. I feel like we could make an argument that we're helping more people, if it's successful. But again, it would be making a pitch and seeing how it's received. We also had talked a little bit about maybe a backup plan to all of this would be a micro grant program to our private businesses in town. A lot of other communities that have received CARES Act funding are doing this. The county and the city are apparently putting together micro grant programs for the business community. So she encouraged us to coordinate with Peter Zeiler and the Economic Development Office on their parameters and make sure that either there's no overlap or there's coordination if Matthews businesses would be eligible. And I can certainly reach out to Peter to do that. Again, though, some communities have designed these programs where they've said, okay, you have to have 30% loss of revenue during these eligible months in order to receive a micro grant. Mecklenburg County's interpretation is like, that's a no-no. So you're not asking for losses. You would come up with some other level of eligibility, or is it just first come, first serve? There's a lot of gray. But that is still a potential. Again, we would just have to angle it a little bit differently than some communities have. I asked her about that. I said, what are these communities doing? I'm seeing, all of these parameters that you're saying are a no-go. And it was basically like, she wasn't confident that they weren't going to get in trouble down the road. It does feel like they're taking a pretty conservative approach to interpretation of what they're going to greenlight. But at the end of the day, if it keeps all of us from having to repay money, I guess that's certainly the safer way to go with it. Randy also reached out to me, and Randy, if I butcher your suggestion at all, please feel free to jump in and correct me. But there is this other conversation that I know a lot of folks are certainly familiar with, is what are parents going to do when school goes back into session and their kids are at home and they're either trying to work or not able to work, and kind of how are people going to be stepping out of the workforce because they have to take care of their kids? And certainly there's an economic component to that. If you are lower income, how are you paying to do a private camp or a private co-op that some more well-to-do parents are putting together? Certainly there's some disadvantages and some potential to widen that inequity gap that already exists. So the question was lifted up was, could CARES Act funding be used to either pay the providers, pay parents, that would give them some economic leverage to be able to have this kind of care for their kids. So I asked about that as well. They think it's probably eligible. That is a question that they had already specifically ran up the flagpole. They were just waiting for the answer to come back from the lobbyists that are in touch with Treasury. And because it's something that the county is also very interested in as well. So I want to lift that up to the group as far as, is that a potential use? Is that of potential interest to this group to evaluate that, as opposed to some of these other things that we had talked about? As a town, we could certainly make a separate request. There are additional county funds that have not been fully allocated, to my knowledge, at this point. If we wanted to do that separate from this $300,000, but that is another kind of nugget that's out there to be considered, kind of as far as this bigger process. So I say all that to say, nothing felt crystal clear. This is ace in the hole. We can do this. Yet nothing was really kind of completely shot down. I think the biggest thing for me is if we can be ready with at least a broad idea of which options, or maybe we prioritize, try this one first. If it gets, gets kicked, what's a secondary one that we would want to pursue? Bring that up to the board, our town board, and make sure that they have some level of endorsement, since of course this is a committee of our town board of commissioners. And then ideally we would be ready with details to submit once that county portal opens up about mid-August, to hopefully be towards the front of the line of their review to get an official amount of feedback on that. And then presuming it's a green light, we could start spending after that point. With timelines, this is my last thing, then I'll shut up, is they also think that there's a high likelihood of the timelines being extended by the federal government. So before it was, we had until the end of the calendar year to spend these dollars. They do think that that is going to get extended, which would certainly be helpful to everybody as far as starting to feel that crunch as we are already getting closer into fall. So I have not heard if that has come out yet. I think we should know before mid-August if that is going to be a reality or not. But the county felt fairly confident that that would happen. That would give us a little bit of relief with what we're trying to do.
Becky, have you heard from any of the other towns of programs that they are thinking about? Just so, we can get some ideas.
So we were the only town that put in a funding request like this. All of the other towns in Mecklenburg County simply opted to put in a request for their own expenses that they had incurred as a town that they thought would be eligible. And then the northern towns, the Ada Jenkins Center had a housing relief request that was similar to what we did with the Matthews Help Center. So within Mecklenburg County, we are on a little bit of an island as far as having these dollars that we want to try to help the community directly, but don't have a specific level of permission to what exactly that could be.
But we are in the queue.
Thanks, Tim. So the $300,000 is locked in. So how the county plans to proceed with this is they are asking for what's called an interlocal agreement from all of the towns. And so it's one massive document that applies to all 6 towns in Mecklenburg County, and each town signs it. And so until all of the towns sign it, it is not fully official. The funds are approved by the county board, but they need the agreement signed before they release the funds. That last signature is going to come from Pineville on August 11th or 12th. Once that is signed, they are going to front load the money to us. So they are going to wire us the $300,000. So we will fully have it in hand. There's no question that that funding is approved and it will be ours. We could start spending it the next day, but that seems foolhardy because we won't have a green light from them that what we're wanting to do is actually allowed. So we'll have it. We would just be retaining it until we got a green light on whatever that might be. And then it would be ours to start spending.
We've gotten a list or a short list of what we can't use it for. Do they have any guidance as to what it could or should be used for? Like we know we have I'm going to use the wrong word, but like the mission statement for the funding, right?
Yep. Yeah. So the last version of the regulation guidelines that I saw and sounds like they are going to have something updated within short order, but at least the last set that I saw talked about the direct, what I would call micro grants to businesses. So that is specifically listed in the CARES Act funding as an allowable expense that is related to economic development in some way. The interesting nuance for me then is this other part of the regulations that say you can't supplant lost revenue. So it's finding a way to make those two parts of the regulations talk to each other so we can help small businesses. We just couldn't use lost revenue as a criteria, which, permission to speak freely, is a little bonkers in my mind, because if a business is going gangbusters, they don't need the help. So it would make sense that you would want to vet and make sure that there was an actual financial need before you handed over the dollars. But I don't make the regs.
One of the things I like the idea of the because that is definitely it is an economic challenge with the child care and the issues, and Randy and I had spoken about that as well. How we put that together and what that looks like, I fear might be a little bit the group that we have here, right? Why would we contain the solution to just us when we open it up using that micro grant kind of solution to nonprofits and to businesses out there and say, hey, this is, if we as Matthews indicate, hey, this is one of the challenges that we need, and maybe there's 3 or 4 others, right? And and say, hey, you community, come to us with what your solutions are, and we can fund that, or we can use part of this to fund that. And so then we're using the community as a whole to find the solution to the problems that we identify. I think then that also makes our roles a little bit easier in terms of we can direct where the problem is, one of them being the childcare, right? Another one, I think we had talked about earlier, making people feel safer, or the marketing effort of feeling safer about it's okay to come out in Matthews because, these business owners are getting the idea that they, the masking and providing a safe place to do business. But if we set it out as these are the challenges that we want to find solutions for, and let the community through that micro grant process come up with the solutions that they have, right? Let the experts figure it out, and they come to us, and then we're just holding the purse strings in essence, right? We can vet those ideas and certainly go back up through the chain, as you're mentioning, Becky, back through the to make sure that whether it goes all the way to a lobbyist who talks to Treasury, but to make sure that that fits, but so that we're not on the hook, we as a group aren't on the hook to so much as find the solutions, but we are on the hook to identify where that funding, what problems that funding should be used for to solve, right? That's kind of my
Essentially, the same thing that Mecklenburg County is doing,
in essence, yeah.
which is fine.
Well, I don't know if it's easier though necessarily, because someone, maybe it's us, has to review those micro grant proposals and pass judgment. Yes, you get a grant, but you don't.
Sure. I mean, that's part of the role, but I'd imagine that would be easier to do than coming up with the solution and then finding the people that will take on the task of solving it.
Agree. I agree with you to that extent. I definitely do. Because given all of this, I kind of feel like, one, I'm going the minutes there, the ideas we had back in June, way back in June, seems like that, even June seems like olden days now, as quickly as things change. So we talked about some money going to nonprofits who have been impacted by Matthews Alive. That's next. We talked about having a celebration that Matthews is back in business, and we wanted to do an event to promote that. We thought, well, we could do that in September, maybe October. Well, as we get closer to that doesn't sound realistic either, and that date would keep moving back. And so I'm not keen on either of those ideas now. Becky shared what Sue Sprout at COS Kids had raised as an issue. We had a call on it yesterday. A number of folks from the town were on it. That does sound like that's tied to economic development, being able to enable people to go back to work because their kids are going to be cared for somehow. And maybe it's merging that kind of an idea with what you had there, Steve, of it's for these folks who may be able to be providing childcare. Maybe that's where the micro grants that's part of the group that's considered for being recipients of such micro grants.
Yeah, that's kind of my idea, that let the experts in that field, or because I know that there are daycare centers, and I'm sure it's COS Kids that are looking at that and seeing that as in their view, they're looking at that's an opportunity for them, right? They can fill that void, provide a product that can satisfy that brand new created market, right? Because of COVID. And to do that, they're going to need some investment to get it set up, right? And if that means that if that's what we're supporting, I think that's probably some of the best money spent. And some of the daycare centers, let's not forget, they also got crushed, right? In the very beginning, them and bars and restaurants and gyms. So I have very little problem with if it's daycares that get, because they're solving one of the problems that we identify as an economic challenge because of COVID in this town. I'm fine with that. And I see where you're coming from, Randy, but if that means that we have to sit down and have a hard discussion between, applicant A and applicant B, and let it go based on, the application and whichever one has the most merit and we straight up have a vote on it. I have little problem with, I think we can handle that.
I think we can too. It's not, I just bring it up, it's not a non-existent problem. It is, it may be a less of a problem than doing the other things.
Gotcha. Yeah.
I do just want to say, and Randy, I don't know if you had a different takeaway from the meeting. I realized the rest of the group wasn't able to be on that call, but I don't know that I walked away really optimistic that some of the providers who are right now opting to step away from childcare in the fall would be incentivized to come back, even if we were able to dangle money in front of them and say, let us help you make it worth your while, or let us help fund the barriers that you're going to need to put up to keep kids separate, or all of that. There's, I think that there are the providers that are already planning to come back and are trying to make those investments and plan for that. But there are definitely, for the benefit of the rest of the group, a number of providers in the community that either due to their hierarchy of how they're managed, they have been ordered right now that they're not getting into that game this fall and they will remain closed, or they have made the decision at more of a local level, but it's out of concern for keeping the providers safe. They're in vulnerable categories based on age or health issues or whatever. So I'm not, I don't want to be a wet blanket. I'm not sure that even if we said, come and take it, we'll help you get ready with these dollars. I'm not sure that we would really have a lot of takers based on what I saw on that call.
Another thing too is if the timeline for spending it extends out, right, then I think the rush is to make sure that we set up a protocol in the logistics of how the funding decisions will be made, so that can, towards the end of August or mid-August, we can get that greenlit. And I'm sure I know of 2 daycare centers that are already looking at how they can do that. Full disclosure, they're not in Matthews proper, they're out in Indian Trail. But so I know that some are looking at it. A lot of them are doing a wait and see, right? Which lends well to the notion that the timing will be extended, right? They may not want to do it for the fall. But once they kind of read the tea leaves, see how things are starting to shake out, they're going to want to jump in on it. My thought is I like the micro grant and then like that kind of the way of doing it. But if we do a micro grant and then from our side, it's like, hey, here are the 5 or whatever 4 main economic challenges that we want to see it under, and let the community come after it to try to, come up with the resolutions. And I think in there, I think you will have nonprofits that look at it and say, okay, we're not going to replace the revenue, but at the same time, they can pivot and figure out, hey, there's another way that we can do this, right? Another way that we can solve for this. I know Habitat for Humanity is making a lot of changes. I mean, how do you build a house with volunteers when you have to be 6 feet apart, right? But they're figuring it out, and they do have costs that are added onto it, and they're trying to figure out but this could be something as well, right? That you're not replacing revenue, but you're trying to figure out how to build houses, low income houses in a COVID environment. And that money probably could be appropriate, right? If they came up with it. But I share that only to say that I think there's a lot more solutions out there than we could possibly come up with, because that's not our day to day, right? And maybe if we come up with what the challenges are, I think the daycare is a big one. There's, I think, marketing and getting people comfortable, or the consumers comfortable with getting out into Matthews and down to the shops. Once all the traffic nightmare is, and there's actually parking in front of the shops that they can go back to, I think that might be another one. And I'm sure this group here has at least 2 or 3 others, bobbling around their heads that they can share of what those challenges might be.
Well, Tim had his hand up.
No, I was going to iterate what Stephen was saying. It doesn't have to, before we were narrowing down on daycare and all that, but it doesn't only have to be daycare. I mean, if we lay it out there with parameters that we know about, like Becky was articulating, that we could put them out specifically. And Cindy, you talked about this earlier. We have to be a little bit more specific, but give them parameters of what, this is about. And when there's a desire, they'll respond with their need, whatever it might be, stuff that we may not even know about.
Essentially crowdsource the need.
That's what Mecklenburg County's doing to us. And we're the only township that Becky tells us that went in and said, hey, look, guys, we're here. We don't have the perfect solution yet, but we're figuring it out. And there may be just a few nonprofits and a few businesses that take advantage. I don't know what else to say, but it takes those people that are willing to get out there and get it done.
Hey, Cindy, Kim, Marcy, Brett, what input do you have?
Actually, I've got a question for Becky. If we do what Steve is proposing, which I hope this isn't offensive, but I keep thinking Shark Tank when we talk about it. But if we
You keep thinking what?
Shark Tank, where people come and they make their bid or they make their proposal. But if we do something along these lines, would we have to involve the county in the decision-making process, or do you think we would be given enough autonomy to be able to make that decision ourselves?
Or we'd be given the guidelines by that time that we could make the decision ourselves?
So my answer is a little bit in between. And it's kind of, I think, where Randy's going. If we, let me just throw this out there. If we said we're going to take this $300,000 and advertise, if you are a nonprofit that is doing something to respond to COVID directly, or you have experienced COVID related expenses, like talking about Habitat and having to make X, Y, and Z changes to build houses, then put in an application for financial support through this fund. We'll review it. If you are a daycare or you're providing school care and you have had to make changes to your facility to prepare for COVID, submit those costs and we'll review it. If we had programs like that, and what I would see us doing is submitting the guidelines that we would use to evaluate those businesses and those nonprofits, submit those guidelines to the county as far as this is the program that we want to run with. This would be the criteria for what we would be looking for in order to authorize funding. And then we would be evaluating those applications ourselves. The burden would be on us to make sure that we had documentation that hit all of the things that we said to the county that we would be looking for. And we would obviously keep that documentation and provide it to the county. But I think that we could probably get away with the program as a whole is what we would submit for green light. And then we would just need to make sure that we were administering it properly at our level. I don't think we would need to submit every individual application back to the county for individual permission. I'd say if one was weird and questionable, kick it off and get some backup before we went down that path. But I think we could probably get away with just the overall program. Does that answer your question?
I think there are a couple things to consider out there. One is just staff capacity. The process of soliciting and reviewing grants is a pretty mammoth one in my experience. So the question is, who has the capacity to, administer a process that can be audited potentially by either the county or whoever else? Because what happens when the one person doesn't get their money and they want, to understand and have that happen. The other thing too is looking, kind of in that world, looking at what's going on in the city of Charlotte. And I don't know, intricately what's happening, but the money that's been allocated that the Foundation for the Carolinas is administering for the similar kinds of grants for small businesses. And I know that I think that they may be having some issues giving it out, finding people, willing to jump in the process and make the request. So it might be interesting to look at them because they're, months ahead of us. And they're the foundation for the Carolinas. So they kind of have this grant making thing down to a science. Would be just kind of the two places to look to kind of if we want to get into the grant making business. And then the other concept that, I keep coming back to is if we're the Economic Development Committee and we're here to create an environment to be economically developmentally viable, there are a few things. One of the things that somebody was just talking about is, we want people to patronize Matthew's businesses. And just now, just out of curiosity, I, looked for downtown there's not a really great web platform to kind of one-stop shop, find Matthew's businesses and do online commerce. So for instance, if you've got $300,000, you all of a sudden now have the money to make a pretty robust e-commerce website for Matthew's businesses. And is that, the kind of thing that can be both promotional and there so that, to help these businesses when there are stay-at-home orders. Other concepts like that kind of get at our mission and what we're supposed to be able to do is kind of what I would say, what we theoretically are supposed to be doing as opposed to like a foundation for the Carolinas.
I wonder if somebody came out and said, hey, I'm on the cusp of having this e-commerce platform ready for Matthews. I just need this funding to get it over the hump. Could they go through the grant process and they get it? We support them that way. Another is, John, is Red Brick, they're a nonprofit, right? That's a separate entity. It's a nonprofit, isn't it now? 501c3?
501c6.
Oh, okay.
Similar thing, but it's just basically a merchant group.
But Red Brick could also potentially, go for one of these grants, right?
I guess the question is what would the application be? Because it sounds like it'd be just a pass through. If you're talking like a micro grant, Red Brick doesn't really have any skin in the game in operating or running a business, but a business may want to come to Red Brick and say, hey, we've been interested in a micro grant. So it would, in my mind, it'd be almost like a pass through in some regards.
No, I was thinking more in the line of the marketing. If they collected together the marketing for the downtown.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of like a joint effort between the Chamber, Red Brick, and the town. I mean, that's the efforts we make with the Matthews Magazine and similar things like that.
Yeah.
Any of you share the feeling that I never thought it would be so hard to spend $300,000?
I have a feeling that even if we did the microgrant problem, or put that out there, I don't think we'd have that much. I mean, how many years have we had a budget of $15,000 to do facade grants?
Mm-hmm.
How many we've total done? 20?
We've never used them all up.
Yeah. I mean, I have a feeling that what's actually happening out there is those that can or find an opportunity or something to do for COVID to solve the problem, they're probably similar to the facade grant. They're 80% down the road of getting it done before they even hear that there's a grant from Matthews to help them out, right?
Well, I think the bigger problem is that it's contradictory to what we need to be doing for these businesses. Businesses are trying to replace lost revenue or lost payroll. Most likely they've got their PPE in place and things like that. And I don't know that anybody, I mean, we just got notice from Chief Kinderberg today. We got 50,000 masks that came into station number 1. And it was like, well, who gets them and how do we distribute them and who wants them? So even if we went in that direction of producing PPE, you know, and spent the money based on that, who would need it, who would want it, and how you get it out there?
Yeah, back in June, back in those olden days, we were talking about Matthews branded masks even.
Yeah.
And now we all got plenty of masks, I believe. So
Pretty ubiquitous now.
it is. Yeah, look, there is one. How do I get one of those?
And that's why I get back. I mean, you know, good digital marketing is never going to become unneeded. I mean, creating a really great website for people to land on. And then the other thing, you know, with a budget like 300,000, you'd be able to put a significant amount of money into digital marketing to get eyeballs there on the website throughout the region. You know, I'm just saying that kind of budget can really create a campaign to, you know, help get people to see the businesses and explore, you know, sample the businesses that are in Matthews.
Totally. I wonder if it's tied into what Becky said, though, of the limitation. Is it COVID related enough to be able to justify it?
Well, it's a result of the COVID, because more and more, one thing we've learned from COVID is you've got to be digitally ready. And, you know, right now, you know, the businesses in Matthews don't have, you know, at least from what I can see, if they've got a great kind of conglomerative website, there's no SEO for it because it's not coming up in search.
And I think in talking with the county, if we were to go down that path, one thing that might make the difference in being able to push it over the edge to eligible would be some kind of mechanism that would allow us to track the resulting dollars spent at the businesses. So is it going in and saying some, you know, Matthews local or some phrase that then gets them something at the business that we can then report back? So they were big on metrics and being able to say the dollars went here and resulted in X. And so if it's just a massive marketing campaign, but there's no ability to track, did anybody actually respond to it and spend their dollars at these places? I think
and that's the beauty of Google Analytics. You know, we can, you know, if you tie a campaign into a good website, it's going to have a back end that does that lets us track the customer journey. You know, like with our clients, I can tell you, try on Medical Partners, I can tell you who saw what they did when they came to the website and at what point they picked up a phone or they went to schedule an online appointment or whatever else they did. You know, and that's why I say, you know, be interesting to build, you know, we would be able to see, depending on what happens, you know, when the person, you know, kind of comes, you know, we drive them to Shop Matthews, and then from there, you know, what they've done, how long they've spent on the site, which portions of the site they visited, did they look at the closed stores, did they, now, you know, ultimately, if they, you know, pick up the phone and call that store or they make an order and those kinds of things, those are the kinds of things that you can track in that world.
I know of at least 2 independent platforms that were trying to build those. You know, like Jeff had one. I wonder if, if we fed the money that way, or if made them aware that, hey, there's money here that could support this. They're ready to go, right?
Well, they had a chance. They should have been there by now. Sorry, it's true.
Okay, so find somebody else to do it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you have, I know Jeff alone, he'd more than willing to do it, but he's moved, right? He no longer lives here. He's gone. But all of that structure, all of that content is still there, still available. Anybody else could just pick it up and run with it, right?
Well, yeah.
Tim, I don't
Right.
understand what you mean when you say that the chance for that has passed.
It's not passed, but this was going on for some time, literally years, and it never happened. Developing a website for the businesses in the downtown Matthews area using in my terms, using the Sportsplex as a magnet and resource to direct people downtown Matthews. So we didn't get in as an EDAC community. We didn't get into that ballgame because private industry was handling it. That was the premise, but it never happened. So there we are now.
And in the past, it never really happened because most of the businesses in downtown, they were flush, right?
Yeah, true.
They
didn't
weren't
have-
getting crushed by 3 weeks of no parking in front of them because the town decides to do, fix the streets. Great. They don't have COVID, which shut them down. They don't have, I have a feeling if somebody from either one of those entities on a sales perspective started knocking on doors, I'm guessing they get a much different reception now.
Right. And maybe joining Marcy's point of view to the existing thought process and developing that might work. Yeah. Because it would definitely encourage businesses and growth, period. That's what it's for.
And maybe that's just another bullet point for the grant program, right? In terms of if, apply, and if your solution is related to this, come. Let's see if it makes sense, right? That's my thought. So Becky, in terms of the, going back to the county, are they looking for something from us, or are we waiting for mid-August to get something from them relative to more structure about what is and isn't, allowed?
Yeah, so I know the questions that they will be asking in order to greenlight something, and it's what they're calling a statement of purpose. That would be the planned activity. How is it COVID related, or how does it, support something that someone is dealing with because of COVID? If you're working with other entities, who are they, to make sure that there isn't overlap, or that they're at least aware if there is, and then the amount of money that you plan to spend on it. So the format that is going to come in, whether that's a paper application or a portal that we will log into, that I don't have the answer to. I should be hearing once the county figures out how they want to best receive that information and what that process is going to look like. As of last week, Thursday, they said they were still designing the process to figure out how they wanted to do that. So my thought is that we are ideally prepared with the answers to those questions. And then as soon as we hear from the county, this is how we're going to do it, then we can plug in our responses and ship it off through whatever format. But if we're not sure, obviously if it's something that's school related, I think we're super pressed for time to be making those decisions. If it's something that is more business business related, potentially nonprofit related, if we want to breathe on it for a second and hope that we can get a little bit more clarity, because these were questions that supposedly were being asked at the Treasury, that they would get answers back. We may not make a mid-August submittal, but we may have a little bit more information to then have a more fully fleshed out project that is more likely to get a green light if we want to wait for a few more answers to determine. It feels like every time we turn around, it's like a whole nother month has passed. So unless we get that extension at the federal level for spending these funds, we're going to be really crunched, I think, to make this happen. If the feds do extend it, that pressure may go away if we're not doing something school related at the time. Because, a website, that those don't launch overnight. They do take a bit to put together. So, yeah.
Becky,
let's
items
go ahead,
related
John.
that people would already have gotten PPP, would they default from these micro grants?
That's another question. I've seen it done both ways. I've seen that as a parameter that some other communities have done where you can't have received PPP funds. And then I've seen others that don't ask. And so I don't have an answer as far as whether or not the county would view that as something that should kick you from eligibility.
Gotcha. And just throwing some things out, spitballing at this stage again, I really think that the micro grant position, I'm sure the county would help us with those bullet points. And that's something that could immediately get into action. In the meantime, we could flush out Marcy's plan B as a dovetail. But for example, the back to school piece that Michelle Archer does with the police department, and funding the necessary equipment and supplies for students and stuff like that. Does that fall into this kind of arena? I mean, parents aren't working.
Great question. I like that.
So I think you lost me somewhere along the way.
Well, I guess in terms of spending the money or finding a source, you have back to school, and in some regards, back to school in a COVID situation, parents aren't working and they're not being able to bring in income, yet they still need to have supplies. There's still FaceTime and computer needs, software needs. It kind of dovetails into COS kids a little bit because all those children are going to have needs as well. Is there an avenue in that direction, i.e. could funding go to things like what Michelle's doing at the police department? Even though COS kids may not have the space, but could they provide some materials and all to parents that can't necessarily have the daycare place or funding, but can get some assistance somehow, some way else, whether it's materials or supplies or, hiring, I don't know, a virtual nanny. I have no idea.
I think you'd probably need some level of qualifying mechanism of, a parent who was out of work due to COVID or maybe had lost hours due to COVID. I think you would want to have a clear COVID tie that we would need to figure out how to vet that, or, it would at least be a question that would need to be asked. I don't know if they would have to.
Because we're kind of talking like micro grant. I hear micro grant, I'm thinking of a business, a town to business loan. I'm thinking more of a sort of an individual grant to some degree that is a family or a parent that has a specific need because of this. Could they get their own micro grant from that aspect of it? And is it pushed through an entity like COS Kids or the police department through the back home or back to school venture?
And maybe related to that, is there a way to deliver money directly to financially challenged households with school-age children who need to get child care of some kind? Becky, that may bypass some child care centers may not be wanting to ramp up. It may get it directly to the families who need to hire babysitters or other caregivers that they wouldn't otherwise. Is there a way to screen and get money directly to them? It seems like that would be tied to COVID. That would be an economic development thing because you're enabling them to work.
I think we're getting into a pretty stretched definition of what we're looking to be doing.
Mm-hmm.
It's certainly a need, but
it's divorced from our economic development conversation. That's for sure.
I get it.
We're talking about businesses. Now we're talking about individual people.
Who work for those businesses.
Yes.
That was my thought, was if, does it make sense to skip the main intent of, what this group is here for and go one level lower, not having tried to address directly any assistance to the business community. I'm not sure that would fully fit the mission.
Hey, I hope I can, I don't know if I'm going to add anything or not, but I think we should go back to basics. We had 3 different points of view, or 3 different sectors that we we're going to address. And one was the private businesses, the other one was nonprofits, and the one in the middle that Marcy was talking, sorry, wrong finger. The one in the middle was marketing, how to pull this whole thing together. And with Steve's point of view about the Jeff, and I didn't know all that detail behind it, but we could pull a website together. We really can. And around the coalesce, around this COVID, we've developed a theme. Come to Matthew, I won't get into the details, but the marketing effort would be directly COVID related and opening economic development for the businesses and nonprofits. We'll have to, those are the 2 sides. And if we can pull a program together to pull all those together, I think the microgrants is appropriate for both sides. Microgrants for the businesses, and we have to develop, Cindy, you're great at that. We can put parameters around it. And also for nonprofits, it has to be directly related to COVID, and we have to put the rules in there. It doesn't all have to be black and white. We say, look, we don't know all the rules, but at least give them some guidance. And those people that are community oriented will give their thoughts and give their ideas and their need.
I will just say, kind of in what's been rolling around in my head is, from my perspective, I would like to see things that are standalone during this time. One thing that does give me pause with the website is what happens when COVID is over. Who's managing it and how is it being funded? I've had some very specific conversations with our town attorney about using standard public dollars, our regular annual budget dollars, to do something that helps private business. There's state laws that prohibit that. And so we are very constrained for what we're able to put our town dollars towards. So CARES Act is kind of this whole different ball of wax that might open up the ability to do some things that we couldn't typically do with town funds. So when we were talking about marketing before, I think for me, it was more of that it's a campaign with an end date. And so I'm reluctant. I would want to defer to our attorney and get some guidance if we were going down a path of something that, yes, CARES Act was eligible for, but then we would really be letting folks down, or, is there some other entity that we could turn it over to when all this was said and done, and they would carry on with it? Because I would hate to build up something that really became something that our business community was relying on and it was working, and then we had to shut it down because the town was no longer able to use its own dollars for it. So I want to be sensitive to post-COVID. And I'm happy to have that conversation with him of what our options would be, or bring him onto a call so you guys can ask him questions. But it's something that we do need to navigate through as we move forward, which to me, it's easier to just make it something that is only alive during the CARES Act eligible funding time period.
And that's partially why I was hoping private business would pick that up, but it didn't. And then the second thing, I think that's where Red Brick should step up. And if they don't want to, then so be it. But that's a perfect venue for them. Easy for me to say.
Yeah, very good. Yeah. Well, no, I mean, Red Brick was in discussions with Jeff and folks about the website and things of that nature. And the town itself is in discussions about providing Wi-Fi in downtown and for businesses to piggyback on. But I mean, that's a really global conversation, and it was a lot easier said than done. There's no doubt about that. And I guess my question about the marketing thing or the web basis, is it for a business that doesn't have a website to be able to use this to piggyback on, or is it the ability of this social media market to push out information about these businesses? That's to Becky's point. Is I'm a little confused as to what the ask is.
Marcy can help with that. Absolutely.
So the magic thing in the world we live in is SEO, search engine optimization. Yeah. And there is this huge competition so that when you enter in certain keywords, when you're searching in Google primarily, your business appears. You want to be in there. So, basically to me, there are a couple of levels, if I were doing this whole marketing plan. Level one is if I just, simply, say, dining in Matthews, or, closed stores in Matthews, or stores in Matthews. Right now, I'm getting lots of stuff, but I'm not getting any really nice, simple place for me to go and have a consolidated place where I get information that is appealing about shopping with Matthews merchants. So the kind of circular thing is one, you've got to have that destination. And then secondarily, you have to get people there. And the way you do that is and when I say digital marketing, that's a very broad term, because a comprehensive marketing plan in this day and age includes Google AdWords, which means, we would buy certain words based on search for what people are looking for when they're looking to shop in this geographic area or find restaurants. We would do, paid social, which, again, it used to be that you could build it and they would come, as far as pages on Instagram and Facebook and other places. That is not the case anymore. You have to do paid campaigns to have it behind it. Retargeting or remarketing, people call them both things. Again, similar kinds of things that not only, the AdWords when you're Googling, but then also potentially, the example that I use all the time with clients is, how when you're looking for a new pair of boots and all of a sudden every website you go to, no demand, has that pair of boots sitting right there saying, hey, buy me. That's retargeting and doing that kind of thing. Like, you were thinking about shopping in Matthews, hey, come to me. And what you want is a robust website that does a really good job of making the case that there are lots of great places to spend your money in Matthews, and here's how you either get to them. I would be very concerned about a business in 2020 that does not have a good website. They've got a business challenge off at the get-go. That you get them to their individual sites, and or you get people into the consideration set. There's like a million levels deeper you can go. You could even potentially, with a website like that, if you partnered with a Red Brick or the Chamber, sign those people up for every 2-month newsletter about the exciting things happening in Matthews and things like that. But the other thing you'd want behind a website like that is really hardy Google Analytics that are all tied into the digital marketing campaigns that you're doing, so that and it's as creepy as everybody says it is, I can go and I can look and I can see, not only where people are coming from geographically, I can tell how long that they've stayed on a website. I can see what they've looked at when they've been on that website, when, where they're going from there. You can establish goals that include things like, working cooperatively with others' websites to see when purchases and other actions are taken and things like that. So that's what I'm saying. A budget like this kind of holistically probably lets you do realistically, a 9-month, if we really do have 9 months or a year to get this done, because building a good website doesn't happen in a week. It that alone would take probably 6 or 8 weeks to especially build it right and get all the right information from the merchants, and also to establish the plan on the marketing side. That's my quick version of.
Marcy, would someone have to be in constant contact with all the merchants that are featured on there to be up to date on their hours and offerings and things like that?
So in a perfect world, yes. In a not so perfect world, you at least have to make that initial gathering of information and encourage people to keep it up. It's in their own best interest to keep it up, because you don't want to tick somebody off by saying, hey, I'm up until 10 and they show up at your door at 9 and you're already closed. So, yes, ideally, if there is, like the chamber or an entity that exists that's always keeping in touch with merchants, that would be the perfect thing.
I think it's a great idea, Marcy. I think your conversation point is post-COVID and circling back on myself and Becky and Kim at the chamber and Red Brick, because we've been talking about just that animal at a downtown and global Matthews arena. The problem is that COVID's a finite thing. You spend 3 months setting it up, and there might be a vaccine or what have you. So I think you're right on target of the things we've been discussing. We've had a conversation with Jeff Atwood and other folks, and frankly, I think we need to circle back to you to sort of pick your brain about this situation post the COVID, because one of the things in talking to Rob Jasek and talking to business owners, it's not that they are looking to drive more business to their businesses. It's that the rules and regulations and policies that Raleigh and the federal government have imposed are restricting them to increase their business. So Rob is limited at his capacity of who he can serve. If you could lift that limit, he would do much better. The same with Kohl's. They're at 50% capacity based on square footage. If you could lift that limit, they would do better. And as things ultimately improve, as the science improves, as everybody gets more handle on it, things improve. So having talked to Rob the other day about the beer temple here versus Airsley, he's like, I'm fine here in Matthews. It would be better if I didn't have to have 50% capacity, but he has the community of Matthews supporting him. Whereas at Airsley, he's in the middle of a mixed use development where the theaters provide the income, the rental agencies, the offices, and they're all closed. So it's an interesting dichotomy for him from that standpoint. But I think if we had no holds bar on the capacity people could serve, and yet they were still struggling, then I think your venue makes a lot of sense. But I don't want to kick that baby out with the bathwater, because I think there's a useful cause for what you're talking about.
Yeah, and I think, at the end of the day, it can be promotional. I mean, if you look on like the Count on Me CLT website, that is like a quick website that got up for COVID to at least disseminate information. Mm-hmm. And, and I think for the beer temple, for all these people, a lot of people have gone online. I was recently talking to a restaurateur who said, when things were 100% pickup, her life was great. Mm-hmm. And her life is more challenging now because she's never created a robust website for herself. And now that she's back relying on in-person visits, it's gotten tough because, people are reluctant to go out. So that's the only thing I would argue is, again, for a lot of these merchants, there's not really been an online presence and an online vehicle to drive people their way, not only to get, live tushes and seats, but to also get them engaged in the virtual world and, create that stream of business too.
I think that it's a great idea. It's a wonderful idea. I am just not sure that's something we can do with this $300,000 at this point in time. What I'm feeling from what Becky's saying, and you can all correct me if I'm wrong, is we need to come up with something not complicated, but very simple process as to how we disseminate this money. And I'm not exactly sure what this answer is, because I've listened to a lot of good ideas. And I think, okay, do we go to the private businesses and say you can apply for money? It can't be for payroll. What is it for? I mean, I have a hard time. I have to keep it like real simple. And a lot of the things I'm hearing are a little complicated, and usually it's easier to be successful with disseminating this money if we can come up with a very simple concept, which I have been grappling with and trying to figure out. We are able to fund money for these reasons. Here's how you apply. And what are those reasons? I mean, going back to the school thing, just to throw this out, because I don't know if it relates or anything like that, but one of the things that I thought was concrete in the school thing, sounds complicated to me to try to figure out how to get the child care and put it in so they can be in school. But one of the things I thought might be simple, and I'm not saying this is an answer, but might be simple, is one of the things I've heard with homeschooling that's going on is there are children that don't have computers in their house. There are kids who, or families that don't have internet access in their house. Something very concrete to me would be, here's a computer, or we're funding this. And I'm not saying at all this is the answer, so I'm not selling that idea. I'm just looking for something very concrete that we are comfortable with. I'm not sure some of the discussions we've had that would be part of worrying about having to pay part of the $300,000 back. And so, Becky, if you won't mind repeating probably for the third time, but I'm still trying to grab this, is can you be specific in something you think might be funded from the information that you have gleaned through all of these nebulous conversations that you've had and that are going on now?
Put me on the spot, Cindy.
Yes, I did. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. So one thing would be clarification of what you said, which is payroll would be eligible. It can't be contingent upon, you can't make payroll because you lost revenue. So you take that question out, but you can say, do you need help making payroll in Matthews? We got a fund. So that could be a nonprofit that has staff. That could be a private business that has staff. Anybody in Matthews that has staff could come, $300,000 I think would get gobbled up really, really quickly. But would that $2,000 make a difference to the person who received it, or the couple of people who received it, or $5,000? It's kind of, it's the starfish theory. I don't know if you guys have heard that story of the kid walking down the beach, and at least helping the starfish that they can. So we could take that approach and just know that we can't touch many, but the ones that we can, it's more than they've got right now.
So then the grant process of disseminating the money would be based on who has the most need, for example.
Well, if you can't ask about lost revenue, it gets hard to demonstrate need.
Oh, yeah.
So what some other communities have done is simply first come, first serve, which feels like a free-for-all and a little overwhelming. My recommendation, if we were to do something like that, would be more of a lottery system. So give a time period that folks could get in. You've got 4 weeks to get in your application, and then we will randomly select. And if you hit X, Y, and Z, whatever that criteria is, we'll cap it. Maybe it's $5,000 per applicant. We go until the money's gone.
That's where the smart and the well-informed get to the head of the line, though, still.
Yeah. We would need to be very conscientious about outreach for folks who may not otherwise be paying attention. Yeah, Randy, you're exactly right.
I'm thinking if we open it up, I mean, we're all identifying problems, right? In terms of kids studying at home, do they need laptops and stuff like that? But I'm sure there's a myriad of other challenges out there. So let's let the crowd figure out what the challenges are, let them come up with the solutions. And in essence, to your point, Becky, how we set it up in terms of lottery or what have you, we go through and see which one has the biggest bang for the buck, or it's a lottery or what have you, but that funding gets out to where the community identified the problem. So we're not the constraint, right? We're not the constraint in terms of what the problems are that will be solved. We're not the constraint of what the solution should be, right? And we're then also not on the hook to actually put the money to work, right? In essence, we're the ones coming out and saying, yeah, these are all great. The town just got 300K. And however the community sees, and whoever has the gumption to jump forward and say, hey, I want to do this, and I could use the help doing this, we let them do it. And I think in doing so, we reduce a lot of the manpower on us, right, in terms of doing it. And if it does become to Marcy's point, if it does become a manpower problem, we do exactly what Charlotte did, and we go to a nonprofit like the YMCA that needed people, and they hired, in essence, they seconded people from the YMCA to go through, paid their salaries and went through, and they're the ones that's employees of the YMCA that are going through all those grant processes or the grant submissions, right? I mean, there's solutions out there to these problems. I don't think we're going to have a massive influx of applications. But what I think would be a problem is if we're the ones that are constraining what problems we're going to solve, and if we're the constraint for what the solutions possibly could be. That's what I'm thinking. If we narrow it down to what we're doing, which is simply coming up with, it could even be a 1-page, we're doing a Matthews COVID survival grant, whatever, come up with something, for the name of it. And here's what we're looking for. We have 300K to spend, and we want submissions between this date and this date, and these are what we're looking for. Present or show to us explain to us what the COVID-based problem is that you're trying to solve. Explain to us how you're going to solve it, and this is the resources we need. This is resources we're going to use. This is how the timeline for it, and so that we then have some success stories that we can build in afterwards, or at least to see how did we, were we successful in distributing 300K? And then that's the scope of our work here for the committee, right? We let the community identify the problem and solve the problem, right? And it limits what we do.
The only, and I got a few notes that I want to run down. I've just been sitting here quiet, so I'll run through it all real quick. The only possible issue that I see with going that, the more you crowdsource a solution, the more you open yourself up to scrutiny later on about who got it or didn't get it. I'm not saying that that's not the way to do it, but that's just the potential downside to seeing that. The second point, I think that I just from having a wife who works in CMS, I don't think any of our 5-year-old kindergarten and up students are going to have computer and internet problems. The way I understand it, there are quite a few things in place to make sure that there's at least a computer in every household. And number two, I know this for a fact, if they do not have internet, CMS will actually provide them with a hotspot. So I think if we were going to look at potential things like that, I don't know if it's that under 5, if it's that preschool age, which I don't know what they can do. I don't know where the biggest need would be, but I think CMS does have a lot of things in place already to kind of cover that. And then the last thing, the more we've talked about what we can use money for and not use money for and how we can do it, my mind kind of keeps coming back to this. We can't make up lost revenue. So what I'm thinking and trying to figure out where we can get funds into some of the most hardest impact places is let's think about who lost that revenue, and on the other side also had some increased expenses. So like our biggest people who were hit in our area, in the Matthews area, it's obviously going to be our service and retail spaces. I think we can all get to that point. So in addition to losing revenues, they incurred some additional expenses to, one, prepare for how to operate in this new COVID environment. It's not just lower capacity. they probably had to have masks. In some places, they may have had to have some kind of outdoor furniture. They may have had to have some different payment processing things. I think if we can find a way to get money back into where they had all these additional expenses, we're not making up for that revenue, but we're trying to help cover that gap. And I think that's where, the application process could be, what expenses did you have that you didn't have without COVID? Let us help cover those. That's really what the money's for. And I think more than we maybe realize, I think a lot of our service and retail industries here have had a lot of expenses that, it doesn't seem like a lot, but I think it all kind of starts to add up as they've opened back up.
I think you're right, but I think you're kind of proving my point, particularly with the CMS, where let the community come up with the problem, right? I mean, having a kid, I know that we got to go pick them up next week, the Chromebooks and stuff. But other people on the this committee didn't know that, but it was kind of proves a point that we don't know what the problems are. So let's let the community come up with the people that are out there fighting the good fight. They know what the problems are, right? And then basically we as a town are saying, hey, if you're fighting the good fight, we got your back. If you can put together a sentence or two in an application, we'll help you out. Or at least we'll give you, the benefit of the doubt of reading it and making a decision. Jesse?
I like Steve's proposal a lot, and I think too, this kind of piggybacks on what you just said, Steve. There are parts of our community that aren't represented among the 9 of us. So we really don't have a realistic way to know what's going to be their biggest need and the best way to meet it. But they're going to know. That's one thing. The only other thing I would throw out is if we do use Steve's proposal, which I would support, I would say that we cap each grant or say that we want to give out X number of grants so that we are reaching as many as we can. I'm not talking micro grants necessarily, but that we say, we've got this 300,000, we want to make 50 grants or whatever makes the most sense. But that's the only other caveat I would add to it.
Randy, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I was thinking in my mind, yes, okay, we could give 300 $1,000 grants. Okay, or we could say we're going to give $56,000 grants, and you could say we're going to give so many 1,000 and so many 5,000 and a few 10,000. We could do it that way. I think someone's going to be involved in a lot of screening and interviewing, not just reading documents. I'm afraid of come next spring, if we're all on that, we've done all the screening, we're on the hot seat by some cub reporter of why did you make a grant to this guy who used it for such and such? And why did you make a grant to that person who used it for over here for such and such?
Can I add to that? Excuse me, I don't mean to interrupt you, but what I want to add to that is what's the process of paying attention to them using it for what we gave them the money for?
Well,
Why would that be our responsibility?
It's different when you're doing this for a nonprofit. When you're a nonprofit and you're applying for a grant, you as a nonprofit have certain bylaws, I guess. Kim, would that be fair to say? You've got maybe a board of directors overseeing you. You've got some implied accountability towards how you're using those grants. Unless we are going to specify it in that way, you need to be a certified corporate, an S corp or LLC or something, or you need to be a nonprofit, and then you can apply for these. Maybe something like that. But otherwise, what are we going to have, like individuals applying for them, family members?
Yeah. Some other communities have had stipulations where you have to have been in existence for at least 12 months. Registered. You have to be in good standing with having paid your county taxes. So there's some things that would add to the legitimacy of the applicant that we could use some of our existing structures. You know, you don't have to register for a business license, but you know, if you're not on the county tax rolls or a registered nonprofit, I think to Cindy's point, we could very quickly find ourselves having to answer a lot of questions about how, you know, we gave $6,000 to some random person who ran off into the night and never did what they said they were going to do. So
or didn't use it for the proper purpose, even if they were totally legit, but then something else comes up in their life where they need it more. And it's like, okay, I've got $6,000. I'm going to do it for this. I have to apologize because I have to be someplace. So I have to say goodbye. And I feel really bad because we haven't settled this. But I go back to, and if we want to have a subcommittee meeting or something, I'll be happy to participate in that. But I still go back to having something very specific that we're going to grant. That's my personal feeling, is that we pick an issue or 2 issues or 3 issues, no more than 3, and say, the town of Matthews got this money. Here's specifically what we are able to grant. And Becky, you would have to be an active part of that in terms of what your conversations have been, even though it still remains nebulous from what we can tell, but you seem to have a better handle on it. Please, you know, and it's up to how much money per person, maybe. You know, I just think we need some, or per company, I should say, I just think we need some specific criteria and then figure out how we're going to get word out to as many people as possible that this money is available. That's my opinion. If it goes another direction because y'all decide something else, I'm cool. I still love y'all. You know, but that's my thought. And if you want to have a committee meeting or something afterwards, like I said, I'll be glad to participate. So
Thanks, Cindy.
thanks,
thank
Cindy.
you. Have a great time. Good luck.
I also have a 6:00 planning department meeting for Rock Hill coming up, but I have an associate who's going to start that meeting. But Steve mentioned the facade grant first in this meeting. And I think if we look at that as the model, I'm not saying to repair facades, but that's been vetted by the town. It's been vetted by our attorney. If you said in the same fashion, it's for expenses incurred to operate during COVID. And like the facade grant is a fixed amount of money with a match, meaning if you had $10,000 in deck repairs, you could get up to $5,000. So you could come up with some, so there's some skin in the game on both sides. And we're front. Then they had to show receipts and all that documentation that we would normally look for. So I would say if you're interested in moving this micro grant model, to Steve's point, is use the model of the facade grant. It's very simple, trifold information. Let the community come to the table with the problems, but say that's fine, but we will only match up to $5,000, which is over 50% of the problem, and you have to pay for it up front. You have to supply the receipts and information and follow that kind of model. The fact that we are EDAC and we're dealing with economic development, it really is the business-oriented office retail persons. It's not the individuals. And so we keep our focus, keep it simple, stupid, and again, use the facade grant as that model of very clear bullet points. You had to be in business for so long. You have to be in Matthews, and you know, it has to be an expense related to, you know, to COVID beyond, you know, revenue loss. And that worked very, very quickly. Jay and I have been able to monitor that. The town gets an application. It's very easy to follow that process. It's very clear for people to understand. That would be my suggestion if you want to get this horse out of the barn.
Only one more thing I'd add to that. It's been mentioned several times, but I think Randy had a good point. We've mentioned businesses and businesses, which I agree with, but let's also include the nonprofit side.
That's fine.
Yeah,
They
I mean,
still incur the costs.
they're important in the community too. They employ people.
Yeah.
Other things that I've seen communities do is limit. So they're trying to help, say, small businesses and nonprofits. So it might be businesses with less than, pick a number, 50 employees, 30 employees. I think we all saw at the national level some massive companies getting federal funds that was not received well by the community. And, I think, small businesses are kind of the bread and butter here in Matthews. It's the majority of the businesses, but that might be something else to consider is, saving as much of that money for the businesses that, in theory, that $5,000 would probably affect their bottom line more than some of the major businesses.
John, I like your idea. I think it's a good compromise. Steve, it goes to soliciting grants. It puts some parameters around it. It says you have skin in the game. So this is not free money. You're investing in yourself, and we are willing to come along and invest to some extent with you. And Becky, to for-profits and non-profits, it sounds like it has more legs to it and structure around it that perhaps we could live with. Tim?
Just like to add one more thing. I'd hate to waste this opportunity, as Becky talked about the starfish, not to broaden our whole community. We're providing grants, micro grants to each one of these parties. That's fine. I agree with that. But along the way, I'd hate to lose the opportunity to make this whole thing bigger, than individuals. That's all I'm saying. We don't have to get real complicated, Marcy, but I'd like to make it a broader thing. Not all of it, but a portion of it should be, we're Matthews. We're standing up, and here we are, and what the campaign would be, we can work on that. But I think part of it should be a campaign. That's all I'll say.
You meant to address.
Couldn't somebody stand up and say, hey, I have a marketing company. The problem I see is I want to get people into Matthews,
maybe.
And I'm going to do the marketing, and here's the funds that I need to set it up.
Yep.
And we split it 50-50 to John's point. If that's what the market wants, then, and that's what the market, and they see that that's an opportunity and a solution to the challenge, then somebody will step forward, Tim, right? Is my thought. We can still, if you want, go down that road. I have a feeling that we're not going to spend all 300 by January, right? And then if you and I want to form an entity and we want to do the market, or you and Marcy want to form an entity and put in a grant proposal and do it and run with it, you have that opportunity, right? I mean, and I'm not picking on you, but anybody can do that. Any marketing company that sees it could jump in and do it and use the same vehicle, and it solves that same problem.
I think we would want to tweak it. So instead of operating during COVID, it would be operating or like providing COVID relief or something that I don't know that operating would quite cover a marketing campaign. But that would be something that would arguably be in response to. So I think we would just need to play with the wording a little bit to try to encompass that.
Like I had said earlier, towards that marketing thing, Jeff already has everything set up, and to Marcy's point about things being updated, it's updated because he scrapes. They scrape the Google listings for the businesses, and so Rob or whatever business owner just has to update Google, which most of them are doing their Google listing, and that website is scraping off of Google. I think it does it every 2 days and gets updated. He has everything ready to go. I might text him and say, hey, there may be an opportunity for you to put in a grant proposal and for the marketing of that website. And all he has to do is put on there some stuff about COVID or a segment for each of the pages for each of the businesses that says what they're doing for COVID. And he could put in a proposal for the marketing of that, right? And he built that thing for SEO, right? That was his whole business model but it's sitting on a shelf. It's not doing anything. Actually, I think the page is live.
We
Not
may
sure.
want to talk about that. Yeah, we'll see about it. My only point was, it's nice. It's absolutely fantastic to give money out to individuals, and I don't mean individuals, individual organizations, but yeah, anyway, I guess it takes one of us or a group of us to stand up and just do it. But
And I don't disagree, Tim. I think we do. For the people that are ready and know what they're doing for marketing or to do that, this is a great opportunity, right? And I'm pretty sure we could capture within the confines of what we're looking to do here that marketing program is just for this time period. The underlying website and stuff, is outside of it.
Right.
Yeah.
And I want to remind us again that, Randy, it's not only for businesses. We keep saying marketing for businesses, but it's marketing for the community. It's the whole community, including nonprofits, and information on where to go for this or that, et cetera. All that can be integrated. But yeah, anyway, enough.
Here, I want to make sure if we shifted here, are we shifted away from the micro grant back to the website? I'm confused.
That's just part of it.
Sarcastic. I'm serious here. I want to make sure I understood.
My thought is no, if we can still do the marketing, but somebody that wants to run it can come through that grant process.
You're talking about the website could be a recipient of the grant process. Is that what you were saying?
Yes. I mean, there are two. Was it Daryl Parker has one sitting on the shelf that he never did anything with, but all the content and stuff is still there. Jeff Atwood has one that's probably more up to date than Daryl's, just sitting on a shelf because he, life happens. But in my view, if I was Jeff and I saw that there was a grant program where I could kick off the marketing for that website under the auspices of COVID and allowing a vehicle by which all of the businesses in downtown Matthews and Matthews itself could express what they're doing to make shopping or doing whatever in Matthews safer, that then is what I'd be writing the grant proposal for, because selfishly I'd be helping the businesses get out there and get that information out. Excuse me.
Nonprofits.
But also then the back end of that too is Jeff could be using that money to advertise his own website, right? To drive traffic there. And so he gets help, the community gets help, the underlying business get helped, and Matthews as a community gets help because we're driving, I just think he already has that website, and so does Daryl too. I'll give him a call. But
Do you see the match as a hurdle? Like John Urban was talking about this being a matching grant. So essentially, to get 5, you've got to have put in 5, and you would have to have put in 5 during the CARES Act eligibility period. It couldn't be old dollars. It would have to be during the CARES eligibility period. So I think
we may have to do that, right?
I think marketing, I'm not a marketer, but normally they wouldn't be putting out, say, 5,000 of their own money to get 5,000 matched.
I want to make a motion.
I don't know. I see it. Then I'm getting ad dollars for half the price, right? I don't know. A grant is grant. It's, in essence, free money. So I don't know I don't think it's that big of a hurdle, but that's just me.
Yeah, Steve, I'll send you an email. Marcy, if you want to be in on it, you wish to. Is it far-fetched from your point of view, Becky?
Marketing being a part of this?
Correct.
I'm struggling to get over that somebody who does marketing would participate in a matching grant unless they were planning on, I guess, going to businesses and figuring out how to recoup the other 5,000 that they would have to lay out. As an example, that 5,000 that they would have to lay out to get 5,000 from us, that's a break even. They haven't made anything. So maybe it's an investment because they would then make money later on the site. I'm not in that world, so I'm not.
Agreed.
Not sure.
My point is, from a COVID point of view or dollars point of view, is it completely wacko to think of that we could get matching dollars?
The only thing that I have to go back on is what the county said, that doing a marketing campaign was untested if you're doing it for the business community. So if that were to be an application that were to come in, my recommendation would be that we run that application. If we wanted to fund it, that we would have to run that application directly to the county because of the hesitation that I heard. But we can certainly do that if we go down this path.
And that's just a part of it. I mean, the rest of it, I think, is fantastic, you know. And this website, to me, in my mind, would serve both communities, the business and the nonprofit. I mean, people need to know where resources are, both sides. But that's a different story. Yeah.
I want to make a motion, Steve.
Go for it, buddy. Is everybody ready to do a roll call?
I'm ready to do a roll call. Hey, I want to make a motion that this group convenes again in the next week to be able to put some meat on the bones. Lori, I don't know if that's the right words for a motion, but meat on the bones for the concept of a micro grant program that includes matching money towards organizations, for-profit or nonprofit, that have needs to address COVID-related issues.
I cannot get on board with that motion. Can I share that now? It's the matching part that I have trouble with. The only crowd that I have to look at to see if that's realistic, and this is different than the marketing that y'all are talking about, but all of that are my chamber members, and we're losing chamber members because they can't pony up a $250 fee to renew their membership right now. So I think requiring matching funds going into this is going to end up eliminating a lot of companies and individuals who really need this money.
Fair enough. Would the money make a difference in anyway if someone's circling the drain already?
Say that
Well,
again.
wait a minute.
Oh, I'm serious. I mean, would $1,000 or $5,000 make a big difference to someone if they don't have, if the business is in bad shape already?
We're talking about the chamber in particular.
No, I didn't think we were talking about the Chamber of Commerce.
I'm talking about chamber members.
She's talking about members
Yeah.
But again,
who can't afford the $200.
Yeah, you can't afford $200. I think an infusion of 5 or 10 is going to make an enormous difference.
Okay.
I love the idea of reconvening. I love the idea of putting meat on the bones. I can't second your motion. I can't vote for your motion as long as it has that matching requirement. If we can discuss that at a future meeting, I'm on board.
Randy, can that be amended? Your motion be amended to?
I can amend that motion see if anyone else has any comments on that. I like the idea, as John brought it up, of some skin in the game there with it. But I will retract that and allow us to address that in that next meeting as we put the meat on the bones.
Thanks, Randy.
well,
You want to second that now, Kim?
Sure, I'll second it.
All right, Randy, I'll take it you're a yay. Tim.
yay.
All right, Marcy. All right, Brett.
Yay.
I'm a yay myself. Lori, do I need to ask Becky? Kim, did I say you, Kim?
I'm good.
I thought it was self-evident but I apologize. All right, then with that in place, do we have a motion to adjourn?
I would
Or
like
Tim,
to
you got
make a
something
motion to adjourn.
Wait,
Yeah.
before we do
Yeah.
that, do you guys want to work out this meeting yourselves, or do you need my assistance to come up with another meeting time?
You want to?
Unless we throw out a date now while everyone's on the call, or
That would be certainly best for me.
Do you want to do next Tuesday, same time?
I would prefer not on next Tuesday myself. I had to move a standing Tuesday meeting to do this call.
When do you want it, buddy?
I prefer next Wednesday myself, if that could work.
4:30? Any nodding heads? Yeah? All right. Lori, it's next Wednesday, 4:30.
That was excellent, guys. Thank you.
Are you able to do the Zoom stuffy? You know, you got that?
Yep.
Lori?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Awesome. We are adjourned. I appreciate you guys. Thank you.